They heard her crying and chose to do nothing. And that was the moment everything changed. The chandelier light shimmered across crystal glasses in the ballroom, while just 20 feet away, separated by a single polished oak door, Alina Brooks stood frozen in the kitchen, her fingers trembling so hard she could barely hold her phone. "Please, I just need 5 minutes," she whispered. But the call had already ended, the silence on the line louder than the music outside. Her chest tightened, breath catching as reality settled in. Her mother was in the hospital, alone, and she was here, surrounded by strangers who didn't even see her. A tray slipped from her grip. Porcelain shattered against the tile floor, sharp echoes cutting through the hum of the event. A few heads turned. A few eyes glanced, but just as quickly, they looked away. One server leaned closer to another and muttered, "Don't get involved." The manager's voice followed, cold and precise. "Clean it up and get back to work. We have guests waiting." Alina nodded even as tears blurred her vision, dropping to her knees, gathering broken pieces with shaking hands, each breath uneven, each second heavier than the last. She tried to stay quiet, tried to disappear the way she had learned to. But grief doesn't follow rules. A soft sob escaped, then another, until she pressed her lips together to hold it in. Because here, even pain had to be silent. Outside, laughter rose, glasses clinked, deals were made, and inside that kitchen, a human being was breaking apart piece by piece, and still, no one moved. Not one hand reached out. Not one voice asked if she was okay. The room filled with people who saw her and chose not to see her. And then, somewhere beyond the noise, a shift occurred, subtle at first. Like the air itself had changed, footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed down the hallway. Not rushed, not uncertain, but controlled. The kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. Conversations in the ballroom softened without anyone realizing why. The footsteps continued, closer now, until they stopped just outside the kitchen door. And for a brief second, everything seemed to pause. The music, the movement, even the quiet sobs. Then the door opened, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. And Vincent Moretti stood there, his eyes scanning the room once, taking in the broken porcelain, the trembling girl on the floor, the staff standing still like nothing had happened. And in that instant, something invisible shifted, because power had just stepped into the room, and it had noticed everything. Vincent did not raise his voice. He did not rush forward. And yet every person in that kitchen felt the weight of his presence settle over them like a sudden drop in temperature. His gaze moved slowly from one face to another, not missing the averted eyes, the stiff posture, the quiet guilt hanging in the air. Then it returned to Alina, still kneeling on the cold tile, her hands hovering over the broken pieces as if she had forgotten what she was supposed to do next. "Stand up," he said, his tone calm but absolute. And for a moment she did not move, as if her body did not trust what it had just heard. Then she rose carefully, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to hide the tremble in her fingers, trying to make herself smaller, invisible again. But it was too late for that. Vincent took a single step into the kitchen, the polished leather of his shoes barely making a sound. Yet everyone heard it. Everyone felt it. "What happened here?" he asked, not loudly, not angrily, just a simple question that no one seemed willing to answer. The manager cleared his throat, stepping forward with a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. "It is nothing, sir. Just a minor accident. She dropped a tray, and we are handling it." Vincent tilted his head slightly, studying him, then glanced at the shards still scattered across the floor. "That is not what I asked," he said, softer this time, and somehow that made it worse. The manager hesitated, words failing him as the room seemed to shrink around that silence. Vincent's attention shifted back to Alina. "Why were you crying?" he asked, and the question landed gently, almost unexpectedly, like it did not belong in a place like this. Alina swallowed, her voice barely steady. "I am sorry, sir. I did not mean to disrupt anything. I will finish cleaning and get back to work." Vincent's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "That is still not an answer," he said. And now the room truly went still, because no one had ever asked her that before. Not here, not in this house. She hesitated, glancing at the manager, then back at the floor, as if permission was something she needed to borrow. "My mother," she whispered, the words fragile. She is in the hospital. I just got the call. I just needed a minute. Her voice broke at the last word, and she quickly pressed her lips together again. As if even that was too much, Vincent did not look away, not once. And in that moment, something uncomfortable began to spread through the room, because her pain was no longer hidden. It was visible, undeniable, and everyone there had seen it and chosen to ignore it. Vincent's gaze lifted slowly from her to the rest of the staff, his silence stretching just long enough to force them to sit in it, to feel it, to recognize it. How long? He asked quietly. How long has she been standing here like this? No one answered. Not the manager, not the servers, not the chefs who had been only a few feet away. The absence of response said more than any excuse ever could. Vincent nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if something had just been confirmed, something about the room, about the people in it, about the kind of choices they made when they believed no one important was watching. And then he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and held it out toward Alina. Call them back, he said. And for the first time since he walked in, his voice carried something different, not power, not authority, but something quieter, something human. You should not have to ask for 5 minutes to care about your own family. Alina stared at the phone in his hand as if it did not belong to her world, as if something so simple had suddenly become impossibly heavy. Her fingers hesitated before reaching for it, almost afraid that if she touched it, this moment would disappear and everything would return to the way it had been just seconds ago. But Vincent did not move, his hand steady, waiting, and slowly she took it, her fingertips brushing against the cold edge of the device, her breath uneven as she brought it to her ear, dialing with trembling hands, each number feeling louder than it should. The room remained completely silent, no clatter of dishes, no whispered conversations, just the faint sound of a call connecting, then a voice on the other end, urgent, distant, hello. And Alina's composure finally broke. It is me, she said, her voice shaking openly now, no longer trying to hide it. How is she? Please tell me how she is. She turned slightly away from the room. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide from the eyes that now watched her, not with indifference anymore, but with something far more uncomfortable, awareness, the kind that comes too late. Vincent stepped back just enough to give her space, but he did not leave. His presence remained like a quiet anchor in the room, as she listened, nodding, whispering responses, her free hand pressing against her chest as if trying to hold herself together. I understand. I will come as soon as I can, she said finally, her voice softer now, steadier. Though her eyes were still filled with tears, when the call ended, she lowered the phone slowly, staring at the screen for a moment before looking up, unsure of what came next, unsure of what she was allowed to do. Vincent extended his hand again, and she returned the phone carefully. Thank you, sir, she said, the words small but sincere. He gave a slight nod, then turned his attention to the rest of the room, and the shift was immediate. Whatever softness had been there moments ago vanished, replaced by something sharper, more precise. You heard her, he said quietly, his voice carrying across the kitchen without effort. Every single one of you heard her. No one spoke, no one dared to interrupt, and yet she had to ask for permission to be human. The words settled heavily, not shouted, not exaggerated, just stated, and somehow that made them impossible to ignore. The manager opened his mouth. Sir, we were following protocol. The event is important, and we cannot afford disruption. Vincent's gaze moved to him, steady, unblinking. If your protocol requires you to ignore someone in distress, then your protocol is broken. The manager faltered, his confidence slipping under that calm scrutiny. Vincent took a step closer, not threatening, not aggressive, but deliberate. Tell me, he continued, if she had collapsed instead of crying, would that have been enough to matter? The question lingered in the air, unanswered. Because there was no acceptable answer, Vincent let the silence stretch again, letting it do the work for him, letting it settle into every corner of the room. From this moment on, he said finally, no one in this house will be treated as invisible. And the way he said it made it clear that this was not a suggestion, not a temporary change, but a line that had just been drawn, one that no one in that kitchen would ever forget. No one moved after he finished speaking, not because they did not understand, but because they understood too well. The kind of silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the quiet realization that something irreversible had just taken place. Vincent turned slightly, his attention returning to Alina, and when he spoke again, his tone shifted, not softer, but more focused. "You are leaving," he said. And the words were not a question. Alina blinked, caught off guard. "Sir, I can finish my shift. I do not want to cause trouble." Her voice carried that same instinct she had lived by for years. "Do not inconvenience anyone. Do not ask for more than you are given." Vincent held her gaze, steady, unwavering. "Your mother is in the hospital," he said simply. "This is where you should not be." She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the manager as if expecting resistance, as if waiting to be told no again. But the manager said nothing this time, his earlier authority reduced to silence under Vincent's presence. "Go," Vincent repeated, and something in the way he said it made it impossible to argue. Alina nodded slowly, her throat tightening as she reached for her bag, movements careful, almost disbelieving, as if she expected someone to stop her at any second. No one did. She paused for a brief moment, looking around the kitchen at the same faces that had ignored her minutes ago, now unable to meet her eyes. Then she turned back to Vincent. "Thank you," she said again, this time clearer, stronger, and for the first time since the call, there was something else in her voice besides fear, something steadier, something closer to dignity. Vincent gave a slight nod, nothing more, as if acknowledgement was enough, as if respect did not need to be spoken loudly to be understood. Alina walked toward the door, each step feeling different from the one she had taken earlier, not lighter, not easier, but no longer invisible. And when the door closed behind her, the room seemed to exhale, but the tension did not disappear. It remained, settling into the walls, into the memory of everyone present. Vincent turned back to the staff, his expression unreadable. "The event continues," he said, as if nothing had happened, but everyone knew that was not true. "Everything had happened. Clean this up," he added, gesturing briefly to the broken porcelain. Then he paused, just for a second, his gaze sweeping across them one last time. "And next time someone in this room needs help, you will not wait for me to open that door." No one responded, but they did not need to. The message had already taken root. Vincent stepped out of the kitchen, his presence leaving as quietly as it had arrived. Yet the absence he left behind felt just as powerful, because now the room was different, not in appearance, not in sound, but in something deeper, something that could not be undone. And as the staff slowly returned to their tasks, movements more careful, voices lower, there was one thing none of them could ignore anymore. They had all been there, they had all heard her, and now they would have to remember that they chose silence, at least once, and that someone had seen it. The ballroom did not stop for anyone, not for grief, not for quiet moments that unfolded behind closed doors. Laughter returned, glasses met in polished toasts, and conversations resumed as if nothing had shifted. But for Vincent, something had. He stood near the edge of the room, listening without really hearing, his eyes distant for just a fraction longer than usual. A subtle pause that only those who knew him well might have noticed. Across the room, a business partner spoke about numbers, about expansion, about opportunities measured in millions, but Vincent's attention drifted back to the image he had just left behind. A young woman kneeling on a cold floor, trying to make her pain small enough to be acceptable. And for a man who had built his world on control, on order, on systems that left nothing to chance, that image did not fit. It disrupted something deeper than the event itself. He set his glass down untouched, the amber liquid catching the light before he turned away. Moving through the crowd with the same quiet authority, guests stepping aside without realizing why. His steps unhurried but purposeful, until he reached the hallway that led outside, the noise of the party fading with each step, replaced by something quieter, something more honest. The night air met him as he stepped beyond the doors, cool and steady, a contrast to the warmth and performance inside. And there, near the edge of the driveway, under a dim overhead light, Alina stood, her phone pressed to her ear again, her voice low but urgent. "I am on my way. Please stay with her," she said, pacing slightly, her free hand gripping the strap of her bag as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. She had not noticed him yet, and for a moment, Vincent did not interrupt. he simply watched. Not with judgment, not with curiosity, but with a kind of recognition he had not expected. Because this was not about the kitchen anymore. This was about something far beyond it. About the quiet battles people fought long before they ever stepped into a place like his. When she ended the call, she exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping as the weight of what lay ahead settled in. She turned, startled slightly when she saw him standing there, as if she had not imagined he would follow. "Sir, I am sorry if I left too quickly," she began, instinctively. Apologizing again, the habit still there, still automatic. Vincent shook his head once, a small movement but firm. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do," he said, and for a second, she seemed unsure how to respond to that. As if she had never been told that before, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a set of keys, then paused, reconsidering. Instead, he gestured toward the car waiting nearby, its engine already running, a driver standing by, attentive. "He will take you," Vincent said. "You should not be worrying about transportation right now." Alina hesitated, her eyes flickering between him and the car. "I cannot accept that," she said quietly. "I can take the bus. It is about 40 minutes. Vincent's expression did not change, but there was a slight shift in his tone, something more direct. "And what if those 40 minutes matter?" he asked, not as a challenge, but as a simple fact. The question lingered just long enough for her to feel its weight. Her hesitation faltered, and slowly, she nodded, understanding that this was not charity, not pity, but something else entirely. Something she was not used to receiving, consideration. She stepped toward the car, then paused. Turning back once more, "Thank you," she said. And this time, the words carried more than gratitude. They carried the quiet acknowledgement that something had changed, not just for her, but in the space she had just left behind. Vincent inclined his head slightly, watching as she got into the car, the door closing softly behind her. And as the vehicle pulled away into the night, he remained where he was for a moment longer, the stillness around him uninterrupted, because sometimes, the most important things did not happen in the spotlight. They happened in the spaces people chose to ignore, until someone finally decided not to. The car disappeared into the night, its taillights fading until they were swallowed by the dark, and Vincent remained standing there, hands at his sides, the quiet settling around him like something unfinished. Inside the mansion, the music continued, laughter rising and falling in practiced rhythms. But out here, away from the polished floors and curated conversations, there was only the sound of the wind brushing against the trees and the faint hum of the city beyond. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had not fully named, then turned back toward the house, his steps measured as always. But there was a shift now, not in his pace, but in his focus. When he re-entered the ballroom, people straightened instinctively, conversations adjusting around him, a ripple of awareness moving through the crowd. But Vincent did not stop, did not engage. He moved past them with quiet purpose, heading back toward the kitchen. And when he opened the door this time, the room inside looked different. Not in its arrangement, not in its function, but in its energy. Movements were sharper, more attentive, voices lower, careful, as if everyone was suddenly aware that their actions carried weight beyond the moment. The broken porcelain was gone, the floor spotless, but the memory of it lingered in the way no one quite stood the same. Vincent stepped inside, and this time, no one pretended not to notice. The manager approached quickly, posture rigid, expression controlled but no longer confident. "Sir, everything is under control now," he said, choosing his words carefully. Vincent regarded him for a brief moment, then asked, "Is it?" Not accusing, not sarcastic, just a question that forced reflection rather than defense. The manager hesitated, then nodded, though it was clear he was not entirely certain of what that meant anymore. Vincent's gaze moved across the staff, lingering just long enough on each face to ensure they understood that this was not over. Not in the sense of punishment, but in the sense of expectation. "What happened tonight?" he said, his voice steady. "Will not happen again." It was not a threat, it was a standard, one that had just been established without negotiation. One of the servers shifted slightly, gathering the courage to speak. "Sir, we did not know what to do." The admission came quietly, but it carried honesty. Vincent turned toward him, considering the statement. "You did know," he replied. You just chose not to act. The distinction landed heavily because it removed the comfort of uncertainty. It replaced it with responsibility, and responsibility could not be ignored so easily. The room fell silent again, not out of fear this time, but out of understanding. Vincent nodded once, as if acknowledging that something had finally been recognized. Then he turned away, walking back toward the door. But before he left, he paused, just long enough to add one more thing. If you ever wonder whether something matters, he said without turning back, it already does. And with that, he stepped out, leaving behind a room that would never quite return to the way it had been. Because now, every glance, every choice, every moment of hesitation would carry the echo of what they had witnessed, and the knowledge that being present was no longer enough, not when dignity was on the line. The night stretched on, but something invisible had already shifted beneath the surface of that mansion, the kind of shift that did not announce itself loudly, yet changed the way every person moved within it. In the kitchen, no one returned to the easy rhythm they once had. Every glance lingered a second longer. Every instruction carried a different weight. The manager stood near the counter, reviewing orders that suddenly felt less important than they had an hour ago, his voice quieter now, measured, as if each word had to pass through a filter it never had before, and the staff responded in kind, not out of fear, but out of a growing awareness that what they did mattered beyond efficiency, beyond performance. Somewhere across the city, the car came to a smooth stop under the bright white lights of a hospital entrance. Alina stepped out quickly, her heart racing as the automatic doors slid open, the sterile air greeting her with a sharp contrast to everything she had just left behind. She moved through the hallway with urgency, her footsteps echoing against polished floors, following directions that blurred together until she reached the room. And when she saw her mother lying there, still, but breathing, something inside her loosened, not fully, not yet, but enough to let her take a full breath again. She approached slowly, reaching for her mother's hand, holding it gently as if grounding both of them in that moment. "I am here," she whispered, and for the first time that night, her voice did not tremble. Back at the mansion, Vincent stood alone in his study, the noise of the event now distant, filtered through walls that held more secrets than conversations. He loosened his cuffs slightly, not out of discomfort, but out of habit, his mind replaying the scene in the kitchen, not the broken tray, not the interruption, but the silence, the collective decision to look away. He had seen that before, in different forms, in different rooms, but rarely so clearly. And something about it lingered, not as anger, but as a question, one that did not have an immediate answer. He walked toward the window, looking out over the city lights stretching into the distance, each one representing lives unfolding in ways no one else could fully see. And he wondered how many moments like that existed, how many times people chose convenience over compassion simply because it was easier. His phone buzzed lightly on the desk behind him, pulling him back. He turned, glancing at the screen, a message from the driver. She arrived safely. Vincent read it once, then set the phone down without responding. The confirmation simple, but enough. He stood there for a moment longer, then reached for a folder on his desk, opening it not because he had to, but because routine demanded it. Yet even as he looked at the numbers, the agreements, the plans that shaped his world, his focus was not entirely there. It lingered elsewhere, in a quiet kitchen where a single decision had revealed something far greater than a mistake. It had revealed character, and as the night continued, both in the mansion and beyond it, one thing became certain. Moments like that did not end when the door closed. They followed people, shaping what they did next, whether they acknowledged it or not. And somewhere between the silence that had been broken and the choices that would come after, a line had been drawn, not by force, not by command, but by something far more difficult to ignore, the realization that dignity was not something given by position, but something revealed by action. Morning came quietly, not with celebration or relief, but with a steady light that revealed everything exactly as it was. In the hospital room, Alina sat beside her mother, her hand still wrapped gently around the fragile warmth she had almost lost. Machines hummed softly, monitors blinked in steady rhythms, and for the first time since the call, the world felt still enough for her to breathe without rushing. A nurse passed by, offering a small, reassuring nod, and Alina returned it, her eyes tired but clearer now, because something had shifted inside her too. Not just fear, but something stronger. Something that had been given back to her in a place she least expected. Dignity. She adjusted the blanket around her mother, careful, attentive, as if every small action mattered, because now she knew it did. Across the city, the mansion stood just as grand as it had the night before, but inside, the atmosphere carried a subtle difference. The staff arrived earlier than usual, movements quieter, conversations softer. The kitchen, once just a place of routine and repetition, now held a kind of awareness that could not be undone. The manager stood at the center, reviewing schedules, but his tone had changed. Less sharp, more deliberate, as if each instruction required consideration. One of the servers hesitated before speaking. Should we assign someone to check on staff breaks today? The question simple, but meaningful. The manager paused, then nodded. Yes, he said, not dismissively, but with acknowledgement, because now, ignoring was no longer the default. It was a choice they could not afford to make again. Vincent entered later that morning, not with announcement, not with display, but with the same quiet presence that had altered everything the night before. His eyes moved through the room, taking in the subtle changes, the way people stood, the way they responded, the way they no longer avoided what was in front of them. He said nothing at first, because he did not need to. The difference spoke for itself. And yet, as he turned to leave, one of the younger staff members stepped forward slightly, not blocking his path, but enough to be seen. Sir, he said, his voice steady. Despite the hesitation behind it, Vincent stopped, giving him his attention. Yesterday, the young man continued. We should have done something. The admission hung there, simple, honest, without excuse. Vincent studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod, not approving, not condemning, just recognizing. Then today, he replied, you will. And that was all. No lecture, no extended explanation, just a line drawn between what had been and what would follow. The young man nodded, understanding more than the words themselves, because sometimes change did not come from punishment, it came from being seen, from being reminded that every moment carried weight. And as Vincent stepped out of the kitchen, leaving the room once again in silence, it was no longer the silence of avoidance, it was the silence of awareness, the kind that stayed with you, shaping what you did next. And far away, in a quiet hospital room, Alina sat a little straighter, unaware of the ripple she had left behind, but carrying with her something just as powerful, the knowledge that even in the most unexpected places, someone had chosen not to look away. Days passed, not marked by dramatic change, but by quiet consistency, the kind that builds slowly until it becomes undeniable. In the hospital room, sunlight filtered through the blinds in soft lines across the floor. Alina sat beside her mother, who was now awake, her voice still weak but present, each word a small victory, each breath a reminder that she was still there. And Alina listened closely, not rushing, not distracted, because nothing else mattered in that moment. She had almost missed it, almost been somewhere else, pretending everything was fine while something real slipped away. But she had not, and that truth stayed with her, not as regret, but as clarity. Back at the mansion, the rhythm of work continued, but the atmosphere had changed in a way no one could ignore. Small things began to appear, someone offering help without being asked, someone checking in before walking away, pauses that did not exist before, moments where people chose to act instead of waiting. And none of it was announced, none of it was required. It simply happened, because once something is seen, it cannot be unseen. Vincent observed it all without interfering, without directing, because he understood something most people did not. Real change does not come from force, it comes from recognition, from the moment someone realizes that their choices matter even when no one is watching. One afternoon, as he passed through the kitchen again, he noticed a young server setting down a tray, then stopping, turning back to another staff member who looked overwhelmed, offering help without hesitation. No one reacted, no one praised it, but it happened, and that was enough. Vincent did not stop, did not comment, but there was a subtle shift in his expression, almost imperceptible, because this was the result, not of instruction, but of awareness. And across the city, Alina stepped out of the hospital into the open air, her shoulders lighter than they had been days before, not because everything was perfect, but because she knew where she needed to be. She paused for a moment, looking up at the sky, then down at her phone. A message waiting, simple and direct. Take the time you need. There was no name attached, but she did not need one. She understood, and for a moment, she stood there, holding the phone, not rushing, not apologizing, just existing in that space where her presence mattered. And as she began to walk forward, back into a life that had not changed on the surface, but had shifted underneath, one thing became clear. The difference between being seen and being ignored is not measured in grand gestures. It is measured in moments, in choices, in the decision to care when it is easier not to, and somewhere, in a kitchen, that had once been filled with silence, that choice had already begun to take root, quiet, steady, and impossible to erase. And that day, without announcement, without applause, the world remembered what dignity looks like.